manual on how to get along. And our text today that Frank read comes in amongst a number of instructions that Jesus gave for us, for his disciples, if you think about the context. But we can translate it to today in some instances. And he started out with talking about those who would be leaders being as humble and teachable as children. That was the first thing he talked about in Matthew 18, 1-5. Then he talked about attending to matters of morality so that we don't become stumbling blocks for those in our path. And that was the next section of the reading. Then he talked about cultivating care and concern for others. And Paul picked this up later in Romans 13 when he talked about, owe no one anything except to be loved. Owe no one anything except to be loved. And then today we come to the conflict part. Do everything you can to resolve conflict. And then if you keep reading past today's reading to verses 21 to 35, you will read about forgiveness. And at one point, he talks about forgiving 7 times 70 times if you need to. So it's almost like a how-to instruction manual on how to get along in this section of Matthew. Now, not all conflict is bad. There are amazing advancements in humanity that have happened because of things like protests and rallies and petitions and people standing up for things, placards and strikes and all sorts of things. Great advancements in humanity have happened because people have been in disagreement, because there has been conflict. I'm not sure if you read this past week that our very own United Church moderator, the Right Reverend Dr. Carmen Lansdowne, was in Winnipeg with the heads, several heads of other Christian denominations in the country and members of multiple different faith organizations to demand that the government officials search that landfill for the missing and murdered Indigenous women that they know are there. And so one of them said, and I'll try and quote her, one of them said, "We are called by Jesus to care for those who are considered least in the world." We are called by Jesus to care for those who are considered least in the world. So they were there to implore, to demand, to ask, whatever word you want to use, the officials to give the dignity and respect to those women and their families. So not all protest, not all conflict is a negative thing or is without purpose. Now, of course, there is conflict that is negative and horrible and has catastrophic results. And often, conflict of that nature comes down to things that are quite heady, like profit and power. Think of any TV movie with a villain in it, the villain, and what the villain is wanting. They either want to be ruler of the world, and take over, right, and be in charge of everything, or they want to be filthy, stinking rich, right? It's pretty classic. But when you come down to it, conflict is a disagreement. It's a scale. It can be something really small, like I don't agree with you. It can be something massive, like a war, right? And so what Jesus was doing was talking about ways that we can come together from a place of love, from a place of compassion, from a place of care, from a place of respect to resolve things in everyday conflict. And he talks about being there with us, where 2 or 3 are gathered. The Spirit is there. Some of you may have heard me say this already when my children were little, and one of them wanted to come and tattletale on another. I used to say, "Are you telling me this to be helpful or hurtful? Are you telling me this story?" I stopped them before they said anything. "To be helpful or hurtful?" And children in their beautiful, unfiltered, innocent selves often will tell you the truth. They get wise after a while, but at the beginning, they will tell you. And it comes down to intent. It comes down to why is this conflict happening in the first place? And sometimes it has nothing to do with the other person. It has to do with stuff going on inside, right? Jesus knew, and we're talking about a context that's 2,000 plus years ago, so it doesn't always work in every instance. This is not a formula that is going to work 100% of the time, but it's still, after all this time, a pretty darn good basis for what we're talking about here. And he 5 things that he said in that reading that we heard twice in 2 different versions. Right? The first one was, don't avoid conflict. How many of us like to avoid conflict? Right? Yeah. It's a big thing. It's bigger than you might imagine. The stats are quite something on it. But instead, go to the source and have a conversation. The other thing is, instead of gossiping about it, go have a one-to-one private conversation with this person. And it's a bit of a hierarchy, a bit of an escalation. There's different things you can do at different levels of a conflict. So the other thing is not to gather momentum, not to gain traction by telling a bunch of people about this. If there is an issue, go to the person. If it doesn't work one-to-one, he says, bring a witness or 2 and have that conversation. Bring a witness or 2 and have that conversation. The 4th thing is to not do what some people say, they call it an echo chamber, is to just talk to people who think the very same way you do. Right? We all need that variety of voices at the table. The most innovative things in the world have happened because people have disagreed and they've had to come up with a more creative solution. So the 4th thing is don't be in an echo chamber. Bring it to the whole community. And one of the readings it said take it to the whole church because Jesus was talking about church or synagogue. Bring it to the whole group where there will be people who might agree with you and people who might not agree with you, and have a conversation. Always from the basis of love and kindness and care and respect. And the 5th thing sounded a little harsh. Did it sound a little harsh to any of you? Yeah. The 5th thing was, if none of that works, then let that person be to you like a Gentile or a tax collector. What were Gentiles and tax collectors like in the context of Jesus at the time? They were not part of the community. If somebody is bullying, if somebody is being dysfunctional, if someone is causing behavior that's hurting the good of the whole, then Jesus is saying at that last resort time, they might have to be set aside. But how did Jesus treat tax collectors and Gentiles? With care, with love, and respect. So we're not othering the person. We're not being massively miserable to that person. We're just saying, yeah, you need to go find some more people to play with. So you might be wondering at this point how the heck this relates to our theme today of creation, inviting us to delight in it. And I chose the title of this sermon, Binding and Loosing, 3 weeks ago before I went on holiday. Then I came back and went, what was I thinking? However, verse 18 does say, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And it also says a little bit later on, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there also. So if we have a disagreement in our family, if we have a disagreement in our place of work, if we have a disagreement anywhere that people gather, because good gosh, even in church sometimes we disagree, right? But if we come at these disagreements with the framework, right? Starting with the framework and coming from the intention of love and care, then we can learn to live together and love our neighbors as we can. One commentator said, we are God's agents of reconciliation. And the word reconciliation means to again bring into unity, harmony, and agreement that which has been alienated. To again bring into unity, harmony, and agreement that which has been alienated. Right? And we have the ability with God's help to do that. So in this river of life, we can know that God meets us where we are, wherever we are. And so the other thing to remember is that when we think of creation, we think of forest, we think of birds, we think of bees. But guess what? We are also creation. We, humans, are creation. And so you are invited to delight in each other. We are invited to delight in each other, and it's a lot easier to do that when we've worked through with love and kindness any disagreement that we have. So, my friends, delight in creation this week and know that God is with you in doing that. May it be so.